We're live? We're live. Yes. Yes. Okay. Here we are. Adjusting. Okay. All right. Good. A little change of scenery. We have everyone here, or those who are joining us. Chapter 5 of Tanya. Chapter 5. This is... Hello, Itai. First of all, I want to thank everyone who watches these classes. I know that not everyone can make it in person, but the idea is to have whoever wants to join us by being present or by watching this online is our pleasure, and I encourage more and more of you to watch, to follow along for longer. If you even for a few minutes, it's good, but the more the merrier. As we go through Tanya. Tanya is the book of Chabad philosophy, is a simple way of putting it. But simply, it's a book of how to be a Jew. Everyone knows what a Jew needs to do, but very few people know what a Jew is. And this book right here, Tanya, explains, one of the translations, explains what it means to be a Jew. How does a Jew act? And most importantly, why or how a Jew should feel. So a lot of us are Jewish, but we don't know how we should act and how we should feel Jewish. So being Jewish is one thing. Doing Jewish things is something else. But how should we be Jewish? How should we feel more Jewish? And for those watching who are not Jewish, the question goes to the same extent of how does a person find himself in the world, how to have passion in life and be inspired towards goodness and godliness. As we know that Judaism is not just for the Jewish people, it's for the entire world. Not that non-Jews have to be Jewish, but that a non-Jew has to know how to be good. And Judaism teaches what it takes to be a good person and to be a godly person. And in light of recent events, it's important to note that it is not critical to be Jewish, and it's not critical to be religious even, but a person has to and must be a moral person and a good person, a spiritual person. In order to have those things, in order to be those things, you have to know how to be moral, or what is moral and what is good. And what is godly. So these are expressed by the mitzvot, by the commandments, 613 commandments for the Jewish people, 7 commandments for the non-Jewish people, for the nations, if you will. And the Tanya really goes into depth about how we should see ourselves and how we embrace our missions in life. So today's chapter 5, we called lose yourself or losing yourself. Another name could be 1 + 1 = 1. How to find your oneness, how to find your place in the world. So immersion, becoming one, becoming part of something greater. What do these words mean? In the last chapter, we spoke much about how a person finds emotion by connecting with someone else, by becoming one with someone else. We explained that when a person hugs another person, the person embraces another, there's many different levels of that embrace, but very simply, even though the clothes themselves that the person is wearing is not the person themselves, we treat it like the person. So obviously we don't hug clothing alone, but when you hug a person who's in clothing, then you're hugging them. That makes sense? So here too, when a person does something for someone else, we're connecting to that person. A person does what someone else wants or someone else's desire, we're connecting to that person. So in this context, we have the idea of Torah, which is the wisdom, the knowledge of what the person wants. In the case of God's knowledge is called the Torah, the will and desire of God. And then you have mitzvot. Mitzvot are the will and desire in practice. Not just knowing what they are, but knowing how to practice them and how to achieve them, knowing what the person wants. Sometimes people ask us to do us a favor. We want the details. What do you want? Where do you want it? How do you want it? When do you want it? Those are all the details of their internal desire. So this is really what the last chapter spoke about. Today we're going to speak about something even deeper, which is that it's very nice, it's very wonderful to connect to someone on a simply actionable level. You want a favor done, I can help you do it. But even deeper is to understand and to come to realize the person's motives. Why do you want this thing? What's so special about this thing that you want? And when you think about that, you connect to the person on a deeper level than if you simply do the favor for them. So a simple example of this and this is just to wrap our heads around this. If a person thinks about something, and we're thinking about, let's just say, a building, as much as we think about it, although our mind at the moment that we're contemplating, meditating on the building itself, we're not able to grasp the building. So although our mind, so to speak, is enveloping the building is really a separate entity, which has nothing to do with us. Whereas when a person's able to study the Torah really is divine wisdom, which means they're able to connect to the wisdom itself. And the Alter Rebbe makes this twofold. On the one hand, the brain is enveloping, the mind is enveloping an idea, but at the same time, the idea is being enveloped, or almost be enveloping the person, the mind himself. So you have two. I am thinking about this, and this is also being thought by me. So again, the analogy of a building, the building is not being thought of by me. The building is a building, and I am thinking about the building. But in the Torah is the blueprint of the world. It says that before the world was created, God looked into the Torah to create the world. That means that everything in the world is in the Torah. The Torah is the DNA of all matter, of all everything in the world. So therefore, when a person thinks about the thing in the Torah, so to speak, when a person is thinking about something in Torah, the wisdom of the Torah, their mind is enveloped in the idea, and the idea is being enveloped in the mind. So when a person thinks something, it's a very one-dimensional thought. It's going one direction. Whereas when the thing is mastered, right? Once a person masters it, the idea can then envelop you. I'm not sure if this is clear, but the concept that when a person's thinking about something, the concept alone stays ethereal. It stays separate from you. Whereas when a person is really connecting, and this is the idea of losing yourself, when a person loses themselves in idea, lose themselves in thought, as we say, right? So it's still one directional. There's the thing you're thinking of, and then there's the thinking. So you lose yourself in the thing, but the thing itself has no connection to you. The thing can be 4,000 miles away. Whereas when a person connects themselves to divine knowledge, divine wisdom via the Torah, they're actually thinking about this thing, and this thing is actually together with them in their mind. And as the Alter Rebbe explains, there is no greater union than this. There is no greater bond. Because two physical things which come together are still two physical entities. As close as they try to merge, they're still separate. Even a mind, when it's thinking about something finite, it is limited in the sense that it's able to lose itself in the finite object, but the finite object is not enveloped within their mind. Whereas when a person thinks Torah, the Torah is able to raise a person's mind to such a level that they are thinking about it, and it is, so to speak, thinking about them. The Torah becomes part of you, and you become part of it. Even if you're studying some hypothetical situation, which may not ever happen in real life, the fact that this is divine wisdom has an impact on you, and you have an impact on it. And this, as he says, the words he uses is, this is a phenomenal merging experience. Yichud nifla she'ein yichud kamahu. There is no thing like this in the physical world. The union and the pleasure and the losing of oneself in the Torah that a person has transcends anything that a person can experience in this physical world. And this is why, by the way, if you think about it, this is why Torah scholars love studying Torah. Not just because it has practical application and because it's intellectual and because it's meaningful and so on, which is true. More deeper than this is that it really becomes part of them. It becomes an essence of who they are, and they become an essence of the Torah. So they acquire the Torah, and so to speak, the Torah acquires them. Now, a person might say, why is this different than any other study? If I study philosophy, I lose myself in astronomy, I lose myself in architecture, and so on. The answer is that in these types of thinking, a person's thinking, again, is only one-dimensional. You're thinking about the astronomy, but is the astronomy being enveloped by you? Is the moon, the stars, the planets being enveloped by your mind? The answer is no. But in the Torah, the source of all the planets, the source of all creation, these ideas, these things are actually being enveloped in your mind. You are thinking and you are conscious of the DNA which created them, the divine utterances that created these beings. And this is why, in a mitzvah, when we do a mitzvah, when we do a good deed, the mitzvah itself is an action. And the mitzvah itself has power, has impact, but a lot of times it stays out of our perspective. So you, for instance, could do a favor for someone else and have zero relationship with the other person. So you can do the person a favor, maybe even without realizing it, and still, even with animosity to an extent, but not have any relationship, emotional, intellectual relationship with that person. Whereas when the Torah is being studied, your person has this intense, intellectual, mindful relationship with the thing that they're studying, on whatever level. We know there are different levels of Torah. For instance, there's literal, allegorical, homiletical, and mystical. That simply means the literal translation of the text, the hints within the text, things that refer to other instances. Homiletical, which means the backstory of the text, and then the mystical, which is the Kabbalistic, the inside, the inner meaning of the text. And at the same time, this is actually nourishing the body. So actually we find the Torah is called bread and food. Since a person is able to ingest it, understand it, a person is able to do an action without any sort of feeling whatsoever. But when a person thinks something, understands something, it becomes part of them. They can become passionate about it, about the thought, about the knowledge, and so on, which people often do when they do understand something fully. They engage a new level of appreciation for that thing. Think, understand, and then you appreciate. That's why first comes the intellectual faculties, as we studied in previous chapters. First comes the intellect of something, understanding why, and then a person develops a passion. So doing the action stands alone. You could do the action without any passion whatsoever. The action's done. That has value. But then to appreciate it, understand it, for instance, to understand and appreciate Judaism, first a person understands, which by the way, in Hebrew, we translate it as Chabad, to understand the intellectual faculties. When a person understands, then they get feelings. If feelings come first, feelings could come and feelings can go. But once a person understands it and it becomes theirs, they acquire the knowledge, that is something that never lets go. Even if they forget it, 25 years later, they can still remember it and it all comes back. And this is interesting in the sense that after a person passes away, the Torah and the mitzvahs, the good deeds that they do, stay with the soul after a person's body leaves, the soul leaves the body. So what we call death for the body is not a death for the soul. The soul lives on. Soul is never born. Soul never dies. Soul just transitions, as we studied, right? So the soul has all of the mitzvot, all the good deeds, and all the Torah studied goes with it to the next world. And it says that the Torah study becomes as food, and the mitzvot become like garments. Garments protect the soul. The mitzvot protect the soul from what? From divine light, as we studied in last week's chapter, that the energy, the divine radiation could actually be harmful to a soul. So the mitzvot protect it. And the understanding, the Torah that it studies become food. It gives a person nourishment, gives a person energy, gives a person the ability to consume, so to speak, the divine light in the next world. This is just the Kabbalistic insight that the Rebbe brings. But it is interesting to note that the Alter Rebbe brings here that this is specifically somebody who studies Torah for its own sake. Which means it is possible for someone, a scholar, especially a Torah scholar, to study the Torah as a subject which is non-godly. They could treat Torah like astronomy or like astrology or like architecture or like biology, where it's interesting and a person studies it because it's interesting. And this can also be incredibly dangerous because when you ingest something, the thing you ingest must be pure. If a person ingests, eats, consumes something which is itself dangerous, like a bad bacteria or a bad virus, then it can affect their entire body negatively. So too, when a person eats, consumes, studies Torah not for its own sake, but for the person's own sake, for aggrandizement, for social status, as unfortunately many Torah scholars did throughout the ages, this affects the person negatively as non-healthy food will affect the person negatively. It affects the soul negatively. And actually, a person could become arrogant thinking that they're on such a high level of spiritual standing when really they're on a much lower level of spiritual standing. They use the Torah or abuse the Torah for their own sake, for their own personal benefit. And this is incredibly negative. So the mitzvah has to be done with passion, and we learn how to do that in Tanya. And the Torah has to be studied with intention. Intention means why we're studying Torah. We're studying it because we're trying to understand and become closer to and relate, become one with godliness, become one with God, become one with divine wisdom, and that's through the Torah. The mitzvahs are the things that God wants. And when they go together, the Torah study can actually become a mitzvah. In other words, the Torah study can actually have the benefit of both. The nourishment for the soul and the garments for the soul. And that is done when the Torah study itself is actionable. And this is why it's explained that a person, when they study Torah, should articulate the words. It's very nice to sit in front of a book and to meditate, so to speak, on the words and to understand the words, but not articulate the words. That has value. But even a greater value is when a person brings the thought of the Torah into speech and into action, when a person engages their body and engages their mouth with the words of Torah, even saying the words louder, called the Kol Torah, the voice of Torah. A person brings the thought of Torah into an actionable way, an actionable method. And that not only imbues the mind with divine wisdom, but imbues the entire body with this nourishment and the garments that it needs in order to have protection both in this world and the next world. And this is really how a person bonds with God. This is why a Jewish person has both study to know what to do, but also to appreciate divinity in the world, to appreciate godliness in the world. And the mitzvah has the action of the will of God, what God wants from us, what to do, what not to do. And at the same time, we develop a passion and an appreciation for the things that we have in this world. And that's really the gist of it. This is the perspective of Torah mitzvot. This is the perspective of the soul for Torah mitzvot. So the Torah gives a person, as we mentioned, the food, the nourishment, the soul nourishment, as well as the body, by the way. And the mitzvot give a person the garments, the protection, the wherewithal, the power, the energy to go through life and to overcome any challenge. And next week we're going to talk about the darker side, the dark side of the ego personality, which is the animalistic soul. Till now we've been talking about the godly soul, what the godly soul wants, what our godly soul wants, what our altruistic, selfless side, our selfless drive is interested in. Next week we're going to talk about our egoistic side, our animalistic side, and our selfish side, and what it wants, and how it is not antithetical to our mission here on earth. It is not antithetical necessarily to godliness, but it has to be trained in its appreciation for godliness. And we're going to study actually that the dark side, how it works, how it thinks, how it feels, and how it acts.